Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derik, and today we're getting into another spicy and today fiery deck tech. Now, there's a lot of legends and Commander Legends that are just so much fun to brew around. They're just very unique, some weird takes on cards, and this one in particular just really has had the strangest builds that I've had fun putting together, and that is Yurlok of Scorch, Thrash. Now, there's going to be some awesome and spicy cards in this deck, and if you want any of those cards, head over to TCG Player. TCG Player is amazing. Any sort of full arts, foils, regular art if you're into that, or maybe some foil edge cards, really with the millions of different variations. Anything you can find or want is on TCG Player. And if you use the affiliate link down in the description below, anything you'll get through that link will help support the channel. We really do appreciate all the help. But now jumping back into Yurlok. Yurlok is 1 in Jund, so red, black, green for a 4/4 Viashino Shaman that is apparently a lava surfer. So outside of making poor life decisions, Yurlok also has some very interesting abilities in that it has vigilance, and it also has the ability to pay 1 and tap it to add Jund to everyone's mana pool. The most important part though is that it brings back mana burn, meaning that each player, including yourself, whenever they have unspent mana empty from their mana pool, they lose that much life. Added to this, because it's not damage, it is loss of life, it makes it even harder to prevent. So when this card is out, it just really changes the rules of the game. It brings back an old mechanic that I think is kind of cool, but apparently was not cool enough to keep around. So apparently it was problematic in the past, but bringing it back in this conditional way I think is just a lot of fun, and really does, it's almost like a plane chase type effect. It really just changes the dynamic of the game. Now, I think the most effective way to build this deck would actually be to fill it with a lot of land punishing effects. So stuff like Ankh of Mishra or Zozu or different things like that, so that early game you can drop these, kind of make sure that you just get everybody's life total kind of low through this, and then use your commander to create these explosive turns that basically make it to where your opponents either have to have exact ways to spend their mana, or they end up just taking themselves out in the process. And while I think that's probably the most effective, that's not the direction I decided to go. I went for a much, to nobody's surprise, a very splashy, over-the-top, stompy way to build this deck. In that I want to just make crazy amounts of mana for everyone, have our commander there to punish everyone, and just have better ways to utilize all this mana, and basically make sure we always have an exact way to spend the mana and no one else does. I think if you want to make it stronger, definitely put in more of those land punishing type effects, but I just went full out stompy for this one, and what I think is going to create just a super fun play experience, but it's easy to tweak if you do want to make it stronger. So you may be wondering, how are we always going to be able to tap for exact mana when we don't even know how much our lands are going to be tapping for? With some of these effects in this deck, lands might be tapping for 2, 3, 4, I think potentially maybe even 5 if you get everything going. Your commander's just adding mana at random times. How are we going to take advantage of this? And it is with one of my favorite things that I seem to use in too many decks, and those are X spells. This deck actually bears a lot of resemblance to my Vial Smasher Rayhan deck, in that it's kind of a Jundy Hydra build with lots of removal. It's kind of a similar shell to the deck, but it's taking advantage of it in a different way. We want to get to the point where even mid to late game, everyone having to tap out through various effects is dumping like 30 mana into their mana pool, has no way to spend it, and just being drained by mana burn, while we're just dropping some massive hydras on the board. They're having low life totals anyway, we're swinging around with these hydras, and it is just a giant burny stomping mess, and I love it. Now, a few keys before I get into the categories. We want almost all of our ramp, and while I say this is very much like a stompy, just fun, very casual type deck, we do want to make sure of one thing. We want to make sure we have all of our ramp at this 2 CMC slot, because our commander, this is the type of deck we want to get our commander out as fast as possible and then be able to keep it out as much as possible. This deck very quickly turns from this cool burn stompy thing into just too much group hug if our commander is unavailable. So lots of ramp, which is already kind of the point of the deck, but also in a way that we want to get our commander out quick. We don't want to be in a situation where every game it's where we're waiting till turn 4 or later to get our commander out. All of a sudden, some of these other ramp effects we have, we might not want to play out. So definitely go for your rampant growths, Farseeks, Nature's Lures and such over explosive vegetations and that type of stuff. Even in this type case, in green decks, I typically don't like mana rocks. Running arcane signets or other signets, or really anything like that, just to make sure you get that commander on turn 3 is ideal. Now, looking at the creatures, it's basically just ramp and hydras. 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 So basically we want to have, there's other X spells you can do, but obviously I'm just biased towards hydras and I try to force them into every deck possible. So we want to always have it. It's very similar to the Value Smasher deck in the sense that we want to have maybe around 8 to 10 hydras. We don't want so many that we end up with 2 or 3 hydras in our opening hand, but we don't want to have so few that we don't have access. Basically every turn we want to have access to at least one X spell, and it just so happens the majority of our X spells are these hydras. In the ramp, we have plenty of mana dorks, again trying to accelerate our commander out, and different ramping creatures. But I think the 2 most interesting creatures would be the ones that don't fit into those categories. One is Erebos, God of the Dead. Erebos is awesome because it stops our opponents from gaining life. And in any type of deck where you're trying to get into a situation where we're draining people or burning people, life gain really just screws us over and it's not ideal. So that's a great way to stop that. And I also really love one of the new cards, Nightshade Harvester. Nightshade Harvester is kind of one of those land punishing effects I said I didn't go very heavy on, but this is just a newer one that I super love. I want to put this in more decks. It's just trying to punish those land decks in a way. And if you get this out earlier in the game when people are ramping like crazy, then it can get decently big. You do some sort of punishment. Obviously it's not as effective as an Anchor of Mishra or anything like that, but it's a cool new card that I like what it's doing in trying to punish those ramp decks. And Stone Shaker Shaman's another creature that fits a category of card in this deck where we want to either force lands to become tapped or punish untapped lands. Normally land hate like this is kind of frowned upon, but in this situation, you're not making people get rid of their lands, you're just making them tap the lands. And that's kind of the incentive that we want to just make sure the mana burn's occurring. Now the enchantments are probably the most important category in this deck in the sense that these are really the main effects that we want, in that they have lots of universal mana doubling, which is huge, and then a few effects that either punish people for having untapped lands or force everyone to tap all their lands. This part is huge. The forcing to tap all the lands, it might just be just as important as the mana doubling because so many decks in Commander now just ramp out of control by themselves, and so many times people either want to leave mana up or use it here and there. And these are really kind of just the bread and butter to the massive ramp for everybody, make everybody tap down, and the other categories are going to supplement this and try to add what they can. Now with the artifacts, Mana Web basically should just be grouped in with the enchantments because it's doing the same thing that most of those are. It's another mass tap effect. I love Horizon Stone in this deck for us because it's basically making sure that we don't get hit by mana burn. If we can get our commander out, get this out, create all these rampy effects. Even though we have all these mana dumps and mana sinks for us, this is just a great backup plan just to make sure we're not killing ourselves in the process of killing everyone else. And then some other cool effects in the artifacts are the untappy effects. Because our commander can tap to add 3 mana to everyone's mana pool, we can do that on our turn, and if an opponent doesn't have instant speed interaction in those colors, that's just 3 damage to people. And to be able to untap and tap, and if you can get some situations where you're doing this 2-3 times, 6-9 damage, that adds up fast. It really does add up fast. Now there's probably and definitely a direction you can go in this deck where the whole point is tappy untappy shenanigans and just trying to go crazy and combo off with the commander. Obviously not the direction I went, but again, if you wanted to go for a stronger build, that's kind of the stuff you would lean more towards. So looking at the sorceries, it's mainly just a lot of ramp. That's the most important thing in this slot. We have tons and tons of ramp, a lot of the green-based card draw effects that we can use to take advantage of power matters, that type of stuff. One thing I will say about these though is very similar to that Vile Smasher Jund deck, we want to make sure that we can use X effects in place of other effects that we already want. So by force, we're going to run over a Vandal Blast because it gives us control of the amount of mana being spent. Damnable Pact is great in that it can be card draw or it can be draining for someone else, even though you do give them draw cards in the process. But that could be a finisher, and it's just going to be better than other card draw effects because of that flexibility we get. Another one is going to be Wildest Dreams, and that is Graveyard Recursion. And while there's plenty of those types of effects in green, this one being an X-Spell specifically, early game, great. We might be able to just get something back from our graveyard. Late game, this can make sure when we have all of this crazy amounts of mana that everyone has to spend and everyone's tapping all their lands, again, we're making sure we're not killing ourselves in the process of creating this mess. That's the thing is, this deck wants everyone to be getting just mana out the butt, and we don't want to be the one falling victim to that. We want to make sure it's the others, and that we're the ones effectively spending that mana on our big stompy dump stuff. Now the instants are super important in this deck, and I say even more so than any other deck. You want so much targeted removal. I believe the instants are almost exclusively targeted removal, and we want instant speed targeted removal. The idea of this deck is to give your opponent so many resources that they kill themselves with them. The issue is they still get those resources and other people are playing removal. So if you get to a turn where someone's set up to where they're going to be forced, quote unquote, to generate 50 mana or something dumb, and they kill your commander, you need to be able to answer the threats they're about to drop, or you're just going to die to them. And to me, that's the fun of this deck, is that it's going to be very big, swingy, and back and forth. But you want to have answers. You don't want to just be the group hug player, giving everybody mana and just watching the world go crazy. You want the world to go crazy for everyone else, and you sit back calmly casting massive hydras, which I guess that would also be a crazy world of hydras we're running around. But you get the point. You get what I'm going for. You want it to be more controlled for you. So if someone's dropping a crazy threat with all of this mana, you want to have all this instant speed removal in hand, ready to go. Not to mention, with your commander's ability, if you're tapping it at random times and you need to use that mana at instant speed, having Ease Instants in hands is always a great way to just double utility. You're preventing life loss from yourself and removing the threats that you're inevitably enabling your opponents to have. With the lands, I always say this, 3 colors or less, lots and lots of basics. You can tell my deck list isn't lots of basics, just because this is the land base that I put together. But it's not important. You can just throw as many basics. The nice thing too, I do think if you go heavier into the basics, you can start running non-basic land hate, which would be another great direction to take for this deck. I already had so many really big spells, I didn't have the extra slots, but I think if you wanted to trim down some of the hydras and maybe go towards Price of Progress, those type of effects, or maybe even like Ruination and get real mean, that type of stuff, you can cut this down to basically all basics. Basically all basics. Maybe some, Evolving Wilds and stuff like that outside of it. The way I like to think about it is, typically when I play Limited or if I play Draft, going 3 colors, I typically don't really have a problem hitting my colors too often. If you use this in Commander with almost all basics but have Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, Fabled Passage, all the affordable fetch lands, and just a few duels mixed in, you're going to have no problem hitting your colors, not to mention all the ramp we have. And on top of that, you can run that non-basic hate, which I think is really effective in this type of deck. So while I didn't go the basic, non-basic burn route, one land that you want in regardless of if you're going mostly basics or not is Kessig Wolfrun. Zero surprise, literally every rule deck I put it in. I always say it, even if the deck doesn't care about combat, just the fact that if you end up with a lot of lands late game, you can give it to your commander, pump it and kill someone, is just the staple of all staples in Gruul. And in this deck, giving the trample is massive because we're going to have some big vanilla, essentially hydras, that really can't get in damage otherwise. So that's going to do it for all the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech, the game-winning step. And now, while this deck, more so than even most of the ones, even though most of the decks I build are not just cutthroat trying to win, this is even more of an example of that. This is really just trying to have a good time. Now, obviously you're going in with a game plan trying to win, but really a win for this deck is everyone's creating a bunch of mana. They're having to be strategic about it. You're seeing life totals get drained, and it just creates a very, very fun game. Like I said, almost in a weird way, like a plane chase-esque, just game-altering type thing that's kind of a good mix-up. But either way, we still want straightforward win cons, and we want to have a strategy going in. We don't want to just ramp everybody and see what happens. So the number one way to win the game in this deck by far is going to be with your commander. You want Yurlok to be able to drain everyone. Ideally, in this deck, you get your commander out early, you start building up these mass, just ramp effects, and all of a sudden people are just trying to figure out ways, just throwing off game plans, figuring out how much they can cast all at once, just trying to play out their hand so they don't get burnt by it. You drop a board wipe, something happens, all of a sudden people are in situations where if they want to cast one thing, they have to tap all their lands, just melting through their life total. It's going to be... I feel like it's going to be tough to pull off the way I built it to where it's not as cutthroat as it can be, but the times that it does work, it is going to be great. Now, the number 2 way to win the game in this deck is the hydras, and that's what I love so much about these hydras, outside of the fact that it basically guarantees you're not going to have to worry about mana burn yourself. The other positive to that is you can end up with freaking massive hydras, because with all these ramp effects and the universal ramp effects, while everyone else is stressed out about the fact that, oh wow, like I got 30 mana, I got to figure out the exactsies, is this divisible by this, and this is the square root of that, you don't have to do all that math, you just tap everything, put it into X, and say go, and then you can count while it's everybody else's turn, but you're going to have a big hydra at the end of that, and you can just start swinging at people, just swinging away left and right. Life totals are going to be getting lower because of your commander, and these are just great finishers. They're great blockers. Some of them have other utilities that act as removal on them. There's so many cool hydras, and just the more and more they get printed, they seem to get better and better. Pick your favorites. Even a vanilla hydra in this deck is wonderful, but if you get something like a Voracious Hydra, or a Genesis Hydra, or a Lifeblood Hydra that have the dual utility of being massive and having awesome effects, it's really going to give you insane value late game in this deck. And this is kind of 2B in the way to win the game. It's going to be Xenagod and Kessig Wolfrun. I did mention them, but these go hand in hand with the Hydras. You don't really have many creatures that really want to attack outside of your Hydras in this deck. Technically, I guess your commander can because it has Vigilance. These two are just great support cards to make sure if the Hydras aren't already big enough, by the time these are done pumping them, they definitely will be. And the very last way to win the game is going to be, it's going to be the most boring. I may cut the card, probably will cut the card, but it's the Sanguinate. Sanguinate is a card I keep trying to cut for more and more decks. It's pretty boring. I will give you that. But in this deck, I feel like it's so necessary just because you have the fear that you may drain yourself throughout the game. And if something goes wrong and you don't have that X spell and you end up with a mana burn turn where you're down to 10 life, Exsanguinate is a very good top deck to get late game where you can take yourself from being out of it to right back in it. And it's kind of, I guess, why I don't like the card. It's a little bit too swingy for me. But I think in this deck, because we're not going super cutthroat to begin with, I think a finisher like this might be necessary to pull yourself out of some bad situations that you kind of get yourself into. So potential for this card to be cut. If you check the deck list in about 4 months, this might not be there anymore. But as of now, this is one of the late game win cons that I feel like just you want just to give yourself a chance if everything's not going perfectly. And that is going to do it for today's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. Now, this is a very, very fun and flexible deck, like I said. Check out this deck list, and this is probably the most just stompy, over-the-top, casual type build that I've made of this. So there were a few different versions of it I was putting together. Like I said, if you want to go all basics, non-basic land punishment, that's an awesome build for this deck. In and of itself, you can go in that direction. Or you can go for just land hate, Ankh of Mishras, Zozus, all of just, if things enter, things get tapped, people are paying life. And those are going to be more effective builds. It's going to be based off your play group. I don't think this can be a super competitive commander, but if you go enough into the land hate and tappy-untappy combo shenanigans with your commander, this can, I would think this could get to be a pretty powerful deck. So you can kind of find which version is best for you. This is just the one I wanted to build personally because I like big stompy things, and this just fit what I wanted to do. And as always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. So much exciting stuff happening right now. They're just non-stop. I can't stop brewing Commander Legends. I probably have a problem. But either way, it's a good problem because I'm having so much fun. I have so many deck lists that are still being half put together. My hope is that we get enough time before the next set that I can continue to get through these because they're awesome. Also, remember to check out our gameplay streams on Saturday nights. We're streaming on Twitch at the One More Mana Twitch channel. It's typically, sometimes we'll have guests, sometimes you're stuck with just us. Either way, there's going to be tons of petty. Either way, Seg and Ken probably cheated. Kyle and me are probably going to murder each other, and it's going to be a good time. Either way, so much stuff to come. But until then, I will see y'all next time.